Well, let's take you now to this week's Policy Dialogue Forum on mediation in the crisis in Zimbabwe.
And the insistence that there's no crisis exposes both the vulnerability of a government under siege and shows that perhaps we have not reached a stage where that is become self-evident to those in power. And notwithstanding the apparent backtracking on the part of the South African government and the ANC, we know that engagement has taken place between the two governments and that both the region and the AU are alive to the issues. We also know that currently the new president of Malawi is visiting Zimbabwe as part of his tour of SADC states as the new chair of SADC. And we are hoping that Malawi too will join the international chorus for mediation in the Zimbabwe crisis. Both the character and outcome of whatever it is that can be described as intervention or mediation in Zimbabwe, these will depend on the following. First and foremost, on the national question, i.e., to what extent has the state begun to acknowledge, as Paulo Jordan said last week during a similar conversation as we're having tonight, that the house is indeed on fire. Does the situation have to worsen, including more bloodshed, abductions, atrocities on the part of a government under siege and able to rule only through brute force before it can be said that the conditions for roundtable talks are conducive? Thirdly, has the national dialogue process really progressed beyond intentions and the various donor-funded initiatives that now constitute what we call the national dialogue industry in Zimbabwe? And on the part of South Africa, SADC and the AU, at what stage will South Africa's initiative go multilateral to include SADC and the AU, and even BRICS, of which South Africa is a member? And what scaffolding can we expect from the international community as a whole, including the UN Security Council? Above all, what is it that we want to see emerge from such mediation? Certainly, an end, first and foremost, to the human rights abuses, abductions, torture, a return to constitutionalism and the rule of law, including the return of the military to the barracks, economic recovery program, and address the diaspora question, which, as we saw in the previous conversation, the millions of Zimbabweans out there, 75% of all professional and skilled Zimbabweans are out there. So to help us unpack all this, we have a panel of very experienced political analysts, political activists, attendant to the region's problems. First and foremost, Toza Botha, an ANC stalwart, one who has been in the trenches as part of the struggle against apartheid. When we knew him here in Zimbabwe, in Zambia. Welcome, Toza. Regrettably, Paul Mangwana is not able to join us. He has not been cleared by his party to participate in this particular dialogue. He has been here before. Thirdly, Tendai Biti, who needs no introduction, least of all to this forum, this platform. Tendai is almost an indispensable figure in our politics in Zimbabwe. Elena Susulu, also a regular on this forum, a very eloquent advocate for human rights in the region, who has pushed us over and over again to attend to this very issue on the Zimbabwe question. Eleanor is also my niece. Then Moletsi Mbeki, my old brother Moletsi, political analyst, author, entrepreneur, and most pleased that we have him here for what will no doubt be a refreshing intervention. Johnny Carson is late he might be late joining us because he's at another meeting. But Johnny Carson is former Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs and the former ambassador, US ambassador to Kenya, Uganda, and Zimbabwe. Last but not least, a former student of mine, a bright student, now professor of sociology in Botswana, Onalina Selelwani, who's also a member of the Board of Trustees of the SABC Trust. So we'll begin with Toza, both. Your 3 minutes, please, Toza.
Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes, carry on, Toza.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Saying, let me...
Just 3 minutes of your summary of what you have to say later on.
Yeah. Let me make a disclaimer that I'm not representing any particular political or structure. I represent myself. The views I express are my personal views. First of all, on this topic of the day, it's important to say that the first step to solve a problem is to acknowledge that there is a problem. If you don't acknowledge that there is a problem, there is no need to bring in mediators or discuss solution of a problem. Both South Africa and Zimbabwe are faced with economic challenges, declining or declined economies, high levels of unemployment, declining state investment in manufacturing and infrastructure sectors, declining quality of services in the economy and health sectors and education, and the growing corruption at the level of the ruling elites in both countries. Both countries are faced with the challenges at the post-colonial legacy of land settlements. I think South Africa should have or must have learned something from Zimbabwe. What I'm not sure is whether they have perfected how to deal with that, because Zimbabwe is now reversing some of the earlier decisions it took in trying to grab land without compensation. One cannot talk of mediation unless there is a problem or disagreement between two or more parties, or between the state and its citizens. Secondly, mediation presupposes that the parties in disagreement are failing or have failed to resolve their problems on their own. A mediator intervenes because either the parties to conflict invite the external mediator, or the external mediator is impacted by the disagreements or the crisis that is happening between those parties, which I think is the case right now. South Africa, as a country, is impacted by the problems of Zimbabwe because many Zimbabweans have crossed the borders to seek refuge or employment in South Africa. The problem is that South Africa itself is faced with its own crisis of unemployment, a declining economy, and a flight of its own capital, rather intellectual capital, to other countries. So there is a crisis in both countries, but to different degrees. The question is, does Zimbabwe acknowledge or accept that it has a problem. In terms of our own observation is that Zimbabwe does not seem to want to agree that there is a problem. Therefore, it's not looking for a mediator. But there's two levels of intervention that are required here. There's the party-to-party mediation or relationship between Zanu-PF and ANC. But there's also the need for the state-to-state relationship. If we talk about party-to-party, what is called rejection of ANC offer in Zimbabwe was based on the fact that these were not fraternal party relations, because ANC went there to see that it can meet all other political parties, including civil society. Zanu-PF was expecting that these are fraternal relations, you will meet only with us and go back home. On the state-to-state relations issue, obviously the ANC was expected, not the ANC government, was expected to meet with the state because it is faced with the problem of refugees, or we don't call that, but citizens of Zimbabwe, crossing the borders, our porous borders, seeking employment in South Africa, and South Africans beginning to say Zimbabweans are taking our jobs, and therefore we want them back home. Neither of these offers are a solution, because even if Zimbabweans go back home, it will not resolve the problem of unemployment and economic crisis in South Africa. The figures of Zimbabweans working in South Africa, not living, but working in South Africa, is relatively small compared to the ratio of South Africans who are unemployed because of the collapse of the economy. For that reason, I think that we have to deal with the issue of, is Zimbabwe ready to accept that it needs intervention? Are the regional organizations like SADC and AU prepared to intervene in this situation, acknowledging that there is a problem? Unless these countries, or rather these organizations, accept that there's a crisis and stop the friendship that is based on the politics of liberation, to now accept that we are dealing state by state, state-to-state basis, and therefore the citizens of these countries are suffering.
Okay, Tozi, we'll just stop there. Yeah. We'll come back to you. Tendai Biti, your 3 minutes, please. Tendai.
Well, thank you, and good evening. I think that the starting point is to answer the question on the direction of South African mediation in Zimbabwe. One must interrogate why dialogue is necessary in Zimbabwe. And to answer that question, one must locate where Zimbabwe is. Where is Zimbabwe right now? And more importantly, why are we here? And therefore, why is a dialogue necessary? The short answers to both three postulations is that Zimbabwe is in a deep-seated structural crisis. Underpinning this crisis is, of course, the complete securitization of the state, the complete, if you like, juntarization of the state, takeover of the state by the military. Something that was accentuated, something that is now more blatant after the coup in November of 2017. One would have thought that the election of July of 2018 would mitigate the crisis of legitimacy created by the constitutional assault brought by the coup in 2017. But on the contrary, the 2018 election accentuated the crisis of legitimacy and the military takeover of our country. So that's number one, the democratic deficit, the democratic deficiency. But associated with the democratic deficiency is the performance deficiency. the lack of output legitimacy on the part of Emmerson Mnangagwa and his government and his cronies. The economic crisis is huge and deep. Zimbabwe, for all intents and purposes, is in a recession that is fast-tracking itself into an economic depression. As I said the other day, you have got a ruling elite and a ruling class without ruling ideas. An elite that has totally mismanaged the country's economy, the country's monetary policy, the country's exchange rate. Unemployment is 95%. 79% of our people are living in extreme poverty, surviving on less than US 35 cents a day. There's the delivery system. Only today they announced a strange unconstitutional decree that all medical doctors will be conscripted into the army, ostensibly to stop strikes by doctors. 8 million of Zimbabweans are food vulnerable. So it's a total dog's breakfast, but one which not many dogs would touch by a long mile. So the combination of a democratic deficit and a performance deficit creates a huge crisis, creates huge uncertainty. But Zimbabwe is 40 years of age. So you have a problem of a liberation movement that has run, or more appropriately, misrun our country for 40 years, brought it down to its knees, and has survived and pushed Zimbabwe purely on the basis of coercion, fear, and capture. That has been its instruments of regime retention. But the citizen is angry. The citizen is upset. The citizen wants to reclaim its space. In other words, the citizen is crying out for a transition, because what we have seen is a case of decayed transition, arrested a transition. Inside the state itself, the cockpit is unstable. The president and the vice president can hardly talk to each other. The factions inside the ruling party and the tension inside the ruling party is so thick you can cut it with a hacksaw. So given this instability, you need to create a soft landing for Zimbabwe to avoid an implosion that can come in the form of another military coup. And the military coup is not an academic postulation in Zimbabwe. Those of us who study Africa know that coups are like London. You wait for one for 4 hours, then two come in a row. Or an implosion in the form of the military, trigger-happy military, shooting people in Harare and in the streets of Harare. So you need dialogue to a soft.
I'll come back to you, Eleanor, please. Eleanor.
Yeah.
Eleanor.
Yes, sorry, I needed to be unmuted by the host. Okay, I won't say much because as a discussant, really, I have to respond to what people are going to say. I do want to mention, I think the key question for South Africa, I'll repeat what Mavuso Msimang said in an article earlier this week, that ultimately what options are available for the Republic of South Africa to safeguard its interests that are potentially in jeopardy as a consequence of the non-resolution of the Zimbabwe crisis. So from a South African point of view of self-interest, what should it do? And when you look at that self-interest, I think there's two areas. There's the area of migrants, the huge influx of migrants into South Africa and the xenophobic threats from within South Africa. And then the second area, which nobody has really looked at in terms of South African-Zimbabwean cooperation, is the issue of the pandemic and the way in which the medical fraternity in Zimbabwe is treated. I think that is a very unthought about area of intervention. So I'll probably try and go into that a little further.
Thanks, Eleanor. Thank you. Moletsi?
Okay, am I unmuted now?
Yes, we can hear you, Moletsi. Welcome.
Okay. Thank you. First, I think we have to recognize that Zimbabwe has a bad government, and it has had a bad government for a very long time. I lived in Zimbabwe in the 1980s, and I was there when there was the mistreatment of the people in Matabeleland and in the Midlands. And since the formation of MDC, we have seen the abuse and mistreated by the Zanu-PF government of the voters and supporters of MDC and other opposition. So Zimbabwe has a bad government. That is the starting point. The second thing.
All right, that's the Policy Dialogue Forum, South Africa's mediation efforts in Zimbabwe. Interestingly, there, Moletsi Mbeki is saying that, being quite straight about it, that Zimbabwe has a bad government. All right.